Today we're talking about another show that should have absolutely been a limited series, but for some reason has been stretched out to at least one more season. And that is The Changeling on Apple TV. I don't know if a lot of people have Apple TV Plus, but yeah, we're gonna get into it. I've read both the book and watched the show. So we'll get into the book a little bit and then get into my thoughts on the series. The sun is setting, so please bear with me as it does what it does. Just to start, it took me maybe a month and a half to finally finish the book. I started reading it, and then fortunately, that was a drawn out process. I started reading it, and I think like the first 50 pages, I was really into it. I was like, this should be really good. And then after that, it just felt like such a drag. Fortunately, last month, Spotify released audiobooks. And so I listened to, I think I read about 60% of it. And then the rest I listened to because I could not be bothered. Like I had to multitask in order to get through that book because it was not hitting the way that I wanted it to. The reason why I read the book is because I saw Lakeith, I always forget if his name is Stanfield or Whitfield. Stanfield. I saw Lakeith was starring in a new show on Apple TV. And so I was like, oh, let me check it out. And I watched the first episode and I was kind of into it. And I was like, I found out that it was a book after that. So I stopped watching in order to read it and then regretted it ever since. I want to preface that this review is coming from someone who is not into folklore whatsoever. And the book and series are heavily based around folklore. When I was looking into the book, I thought it was more of a thriller mystery, which it kind of is, but heavy folklore throughout both the show and the book. And if you're not into that, it might make for a not so great viewing and reading experience. So before we get any further into it, let's talk a little bit about the author. So this book was written by Victor LaValle. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. LaValle. This book was written by Victor LaValle. Hopefully one of those is correct. He's an award-winning author for his fantasy books. He was born and raised in Queens by his Ugandan mother. And I think this is important because the character in this book was also raised by, the main character was also raised by a single Ugandan mother. And I wish, some books have like a Q&A with the author at the end of them. I wish this book had that because I would love to know more about how his culture inspired this writing of this book and his other writings in general. Next, a little about the title, which really, I think, piqued my interest even more than just like finding out about the show. I watched the show, didn't know what a changeling was, whatever. And then I picked up the book and I was like, maybe I should find out what a changeling is. And of course it comes up in the book. They fill you in. But before reading it, I looked up the definition, and a changeling is a child believed to have been secretly substituted by fairies for the parent's real child in infancy, which sounds really interesting. And when I first started reading it, I was like, who is the changeling? He does have a child in the book, but my brain, and maybe this is dumb, my brain was like, was his dad the changeling? Was he the changeling? Is his child the changeling? Like, who are we going to find out is the changeling? And there's so much mystery around his father in the book that I was like, was his father the changeling? And I honestly probably would have liked that book better. Anyway. Not too many spoilers, but that's where my brain went when I started reading this book. So as I mentioned, on Storygraph, the book is listed as a fantasy horror thriller. And I don't think I've ever read any fantasy book besides this. I could be wrong. Maybe this was my first fantasy. And I think I'm glad I got it out of the way so I can know that I'm not really into fantasy. I felt like this book was a really slow burn. It has very short chapters, so it felt like a page turner. I'm like, it takes 2 minutes to read a chapter. That's great. I'm at chapter 6 in no time. But then the events that happened throughout the book made it feel so incredibly slow. And I'm like, can we get to the point, please? Please just let me know what's happening. I'm sure there are a lot of things that I didn't understand or misunderstood that could be helped and answered by a second read, but I was so unentertained and unenthusiastic about even finishing the book that I don't think that's ever gonna happen. So as I talk about it, there might be some things that I have missed out on because I should have read it twice, but that didn't happen, so bear with me. All in all, I think I give the book, and this is just based on my opinion, I think if you're into fantasy, you probably, and folklore, you will probably have a better time reading it. I'm gonna give this book a 2.5. It just felt way too slow. And there were also some points when I could, and this isn't a bad thing, this is not a criticism, I just think it's interesting. I could tell that it was written by a man, and I don't read a lot of male authors, which I want to read more of, especially Black men. But I wanna, yeah, it was like very noticeable, like, oh, this is definitely written by a man, which I thought was interesting. Especially when his wife, this is the beginning of the book, so not a spoiler, but his wife goes into labor, and the friend that they're with, I can't remember if it was a friend or, no, it was her friend. The friend that they're with doesn't go with them on the train to go home because they were going to have a home birth. And I'm like, if I was with my best friend and she went into labor, I'm not going to let them get on the train by themselves. Like, I'm going to go with them. And I feel like that is a different mindset for men and women, maybe. Or maybe it was like so important that this best friend didn't go. Or this person. It might have been the sister who was also the midwife who needed to go home and prepare for the birth as well. I'm sure it made sense. And again, a reread would be helpful. But I was just like, if you don't get on the train with them, what are you doing? Okay, so those are my thoughts on the book. I hope they made sense. We're gonna get more into the details of the story as we talk about the show. So as I mentioned, I started watching the show and thought it was interesting. So in doing research, found out it was a book and wanted to read the book before I watched the show. I feel like I regret that a little bit because I would have enjoyed the show more had I not had such a hard time getting through the book. It is a mystery. There is a bit of suspense. And I think sitting and watching it all unfold without knowing what was going to happen would have made it a more enjoyable watch than a read. But still, and this is where it gets hard when you've read it and you know the story. It's like, would I have been just as bored watching it as I was reading it? I don't know. I don't know. They stuck very closely to the book for the first, there are 8 episodes. For the first 5 episodes, it's very much as the book goes. And then episode 6 and episode 7 are completely not a part of the book. And this, as I said, it's not a limited series. So there's going to be a season 2, which if they had stuck to the book, I don't think that would have been necessary. But by adding these other storylines, it does help to stretch it out a little bit, which I guess is what Hollywood wants to do. I think my favorite episode from the season is episode 7, which is about the mom. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I didn't understand not one bit of what was happening in that episode and why, but I still enjoyed it. I don't know how else to explain it. I really liked feeling that I didn't know what was happening. There was this part of me that was like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? What ended up happening wasn't enjoyable, but I don't want to spoil this for anyone, so I'm being very vague. But it is my favorite episode of the season, if I have to pick one, episode 7. There is some, I can't even say that. I was gonna say there is some world building in this show, but I don't think that's true. It takes place in the real world, and then you're taken to 2 or 3 places that aren't a part of the real world. And the characters are speaking as if it's some amazing, look at what we've created. But it's like, this is just an island that you found. And then there's another world that's like underground that isn't in the book. So this is really interesting that they tried to add this, but I think they did it so quickly that it just wasn't well developed. And I think it could have been more interesting if it was in more of the show and we kind of got to understand that there are other worlds that exist within our own, but it was just like thrown in there like, oh, look at this. There you go. And it's like, why waste our time? I don't know. I didn't like it very much. When it comes to episode 6, which is also off book, not a part of the actual book. And one criticism I had of the book, another criticism I had of the book, is that we don't get to see what Lakeith's wife is going through. She's experiencing a lot of challenges as a new mom, and Lakeith's character, Apollo, thinks that she's crazy. Understandably. But in the series, we get a peek at what she was experiencing, which helps to like build empathy for this character. She ends up doing some terrible things, which without that empathy is like, I hate this woman. But once you get to see her experience, it's like, okay, I get it. I understand. And I think that that's really helpful. There's another character in the show who is not a trustworthy person. And I think in the book, while I was reading, I feel like I should have felt that earlier on, but I didn't. And it wasn't until watching the show, as soon as he stepped onto the screen, I was like, this is sus. But again, is that because I read the book and knew what was going to happen? Or was he a sus character from the jump? If you've watched the show, let me know. If you can even guess who I'm talking about, let me know your thoughts. I want to dive a little bit deeper. And so the next bit of this is going to have some big spoilers. So if you're not interested, go away. But if you are interested, come with me. So Lakeith, I have to call him Lakeith, but his name is Apollo. The character Lakeith plays is Apollo. And I can't recall his wife's name. I didn't write it down. But they have a child who is the Changeling. So at some point in the first 6 months of this baby being born, it's swapped out for something else. And Lakeith can't tell. And in the book, they describe it as him just being so love blind, basically, to being a new father that he doesn't realize that his baby is not a baby. But the mom can tell. And there are a group of women who have also experienced this, like realizing that their child is no longer their child. In the book, as I said, they don't mention what she experienced. But in the movie, they show that she's like being yelled at by this baby. She can't sleep because every time she goes to sleep, this thing is screaming and waking her up. She's being bit by this thing, and she just knows like this is not her child. It's definitely not a child, period. So she finds a group online who's like, you need to destroy this thing. She can't tell Lakeith because Lakeith is like, go see a psychiatrist, get on some pills because you're crazy. And so she ends up, trigger warning for all of you, abuse and all of the things. She ends up tying up Lakeith, and in the book the description I think in the book is actually worse than what they show on TV, which is probably for the best. But she beats Lakeith half to death. Apollo. Why do I keep calling him Lakeith? She beats her husband half to death and kills their child. Or what Lakeith thinks is their child and what she knows isn't. But the rest of the world, like as this is happening, there's a funeral for the baby, it's buried, and everyone thinks that this child is their child. And so the wife, the mom, runs away to this island where other mothers are that have done similar things to their children or have lost their children as a result of these fairies coming in and taking them. And she doesn't want to live a life just on this island. She knows her child is still out there. A lot of the women on this island have given up on trying to find them or never tried, but she is determined to find her child. The show leaves with Apollo leaving the island, but he hasn't found his wife yet. And in the show, there's a greater being that kind of attacks the island, which is not a part of the book. And I'm not sure what it is. That's what season 2 is going to tell everybody. I'm not watching it, but y'all can find out. But in the book, there's a group of men who are kidnapping these children and swapping them out. And one of the guys, his name, what is his name? Was it Christmas? I can't even remember. But he is able to hack into everyone's computers, take pictures from surveillance cameras and send them to the wife's phone, and then deletes them. And she, you know, is trying to tell Apollo, like, somebody is sending me these photos, somebody's stalking us, but she doesn't have any evidence. So she also thinks she's going crazy. Everyone thinks she's going crazy. Anyway, he's the one that's harming these children in order to give them to a troll. And I have no idea why. I don't know what this troll, if they don't give these offerings to this troll, I don't know what is going to happen. And I'm sure there was a folktale that was told by somebody in this book that would give an answer, but I didn't care anymore. I didn't care. So Lakeith and his wife, Apollo and his wife, go and find the troll and find their baby and live a great life after, apparently. I don't even like talking about this. You know how hard it is for me to make this video right now because I was so disappointed. And the most disappointing part, so bear with me, please. The wife, before they get married, traveled to Brazil and met a witch. And she told this witch her 3 wishes, and the witch tied a string around her wrist and said, when your wishes come true, the thread will fall off. But Apollo's ego ruined everything. He saw the string, and his catchphrase is, I'm the god Apollo. And when she told him that she had their 3 wishes, he was like, I can make those come true. Cuts the string off, please. I don't believe in witches, but if somebody tells me not to cut the string, I'm not cutting the string. One of her wishes is to be a mother. Another is to have a great husband or what have you. And we find out at the very end of all of this shit they've just been through that her 3rd wish was to have an adventurous life. Or to have a life full of adventure. And I was just like, this is what you get for cutting the string, because this is the adventure you got as a result. And I just thought it was so ridiculous. I could not help but roll my eyes at the end of it. Like, all of this happened because she wished for an adventure and Apollo cut the string. Anyway, I was talking to my friend, so that's his catchphrase. I am the god Apollo. And he is named after Apollo from the Rocky movies. In the book, it talks about how his dad and mom went to see Rocky on their first date, I think. And it was such a special moment that his dad was like, I want to name my son Rocky, but he's going to be half black. And so maybe that's not a good look. I'm going to name him Apollo after the black character. Isn't that so ridiculous? Anyway, so his name is Apollo because of the Rocky movies. And he goes around, like, when he needs a burst of courage, he's like, I am the god Apollo. And I was talking to my friends about this. I was like, would you marry a man who did that? And they were like, absolutely not. I'm all over the place. And I think my last note about this show, and people might disagree with me. I don't think Lakeith can carry a show. I don't think he's that great of an actor to be the star of a whole show. And he's coming out with a new movie, which I am going to watch. The Book of Clarence. I'm definitely going to watch that. And hopefully He does a better job. I don't think Lakeith can carry a show. 45 minutes of just Lakeith interacting with different people. It's a no. It's a no for me. And it's interesting because he co-starred in The Photograph with Issa Rae. And it was more so about Issa Rae's character. So maybe I didn't get the full scope of his talents then. But I don't remember thinking this about him. But now that I've watched the show, which this is 8 times as long, 5 times as long as that. So I have a lot more material to go with. But yeah, I don't think Lakeith was the best person to be cast for this. So thank you for coming along on this tangent about The Changeling with me. I don't recommend you watch it. That's my final piece. Just don't bother. But yeah, leave your thoughts. If you have read or watched it, leave your thoughts below. Let me know what you think. But next, I just finished reading Black Cake. And so the show is on Hulu. So I'm probably going to get into that tonight. And hopefully in the next couple of weeks, I'll have another video about that. I also have a Substack about the things that I've read and watched throughout the month. So if you're interested, click the link below and check it out. And I'll see you next time.